Hello, my name is Judd, and this is the first video of what is hopefully a long string of videos jumping into a deep dive about tanking in World of Warcraft Dragonflight. I've been playing WoW since all the way back in vanilla, and I'm hoping to share some of that experience with y'all. We're going to start by evaluating each of the tanks on the beta. My good friend and co-tank Kazi and I have leveled each of these tanks from 60 to 70. We've played through the Heroic Dungeons, which is the highest content available at this point. We've played around with each of the talent trees. We've gotten a general feel for how each of the classes play. And this comes with the obvious caveat that this is still in beta. Some of the buttons in the class tree just don't even work right now. There's all kinds of bugs in the game. So yeah, we're getting a first look at the classes. Changes to the class tree are still to come. And as that drops in the next weeks, we'll do videos covering each tank in far more detail and talking about each of the new systems and content. And we'll probably put together a tier list as well. So without further ado, let's talk about tanks on the beta. Blood Death Knight's playstyle for the last 2 seasons has centered around spamming Heartstrike with every available rune in order to maintain as close to 100% uptime on Dancing Rune Weapon as possible. Thanks to some friendly tuning to both their damage and survivability, they have been the undisputed kings of high-end Mythic Plus and Mythic Raid. While their talent tree won't deliver the same level of survivability they currently have on live servers, it delivers on most of what long-term Blood DK players enjoy most about the spec. The biggest change from live will revolve around Dancing Rune Weapon. Gone is the ability to extend its duration with Heart Strikes. However, Everlasting Bond doubles its 8-second baseline duration, while Insatiable Blade reduces its cooldown in the same way the Crimson Rune Weapon Legendary does on live. These traits, along with Tombstone, will likely be the standard choice. The rest of the class tree and spec tree do provide options. The capstone choices in the class tree will likely all see play. Abomination Limb is available for mob control, while Soul Reaper provides the option for an execute, which is often valuable in raid encounters. In the spec tree, Bone Storm, Purgatory, and Red Thirst see a return, while Bloodshot and Iron Heart look to significantly increase the value of Mastery. With lowered relative secondary stats and HP pools going into the beginning of an expansion, you may have to opt into a more defensive build down the left side of the tree to be able to survive, leaving fewer points for damage options. Overall, the loss of the tier set, gavel, and significant amounts of secondary stats will hit Blood DKs very hard early on in the expansion. But long-time players who enjoy the aspect of the spec that require balancing runes, runic power, and your cooldowns to keep yourself alive will enjoy the way the spec flows. After being the premier tank for most of Battle for Azeroth, Protection Warriors saw their stock diminish significantly in Shadowlands. It wasn't until Season 4 that Prot Warriors started to find their stride with a hectic high-movement playstyle. Dragonflight does not reinforce the dash-in, dash-out playstyle of Live, but instead moves in a different direction to one of the best designed trees put out yet. With the ability to talent into an AoE Silence, an AoE Disorient, an AoE Stun, an AoE Grip, and 2 different single-target stuns, Prot Warrior has the ability to bring as much mob control as your group needs. They also have talents that provide an incredible amount of self-healing, in the form of Leech and passive healing. Combine that with a toolkit that is exceptional at dishing out AoE damage and has the strongest execute amongst tanks, it's easy to see why there's a lot of excitement about Prot Warrior heading into Dragonflight. The Warrior class tree provides tons of pathing options and some truly fantastic choices. Warrior, more so than any other tank, can design their talent tree around what the specific fight needs. Need a stronger rallying cry? No problem. Want to dispel fears or incapacitates from your entire group? No problem. Or maybe your group really needs a strong execute. The Warrior class tree provides incredible flexibility and choice from top to bottom and is the gold standard of what a class tree can be. The Prot spec tree picks up where the class tree left off, providing lots of meaningful choices. Warriors can spec into a Rend Thunderstorm build that provides massive AoE damage and will likely launch them to the front of the Mythic Plus tier list, Alternatively, builds that prioritize Shield Slam and Execute look to be incredibly strong single target damage for many raid encounters. The ability to move talents from defensive to more AoE damage to more single target damage is what every tank spec hopes to see in their class tree. And the current iteration of the Warrior spec tree provides it really well. Unfortunately, the developers overshot a little bit with the strength of this class tree, and we are already starting to see some nerfs. Tuning aside, however, Prot Warrior is incredibly fun to play and will likely be one of the most flexible tanks in Dragonflight. Guardian Druid has been the whipping boy amongst tanks for almost all of Shadowlands. A playstyle that revolves around being incredibly strong during Incarn, a 3-minute cooldown, and incredibly weak in between rarely found its niche in either Raid or Mythic Plus. When their tier set solved their biggest weakness, low damage and lack of any kind of snap threat, they saw it repeatedly nerfed into the ground. Unfortunately, the current iteration of the talent tree in Dragonflight does little to improve the spec from where it is on live. The playstyle isn't different when you step into a dungeon. During Incarn, you still feel unkillable. However, in order to get Incarn to the same power level that you're used to, you're required to invest 4 points into it that are spread all around the spec tree. The Druid class tree, in its current iteration, is very clunky. Capstones that require shifting stances, such as Fur and Heart of the Wild, are borderline unplayable other than in raid fights where you spend significant time not actively tanking. Nature's Vigil is a fantastic addition to the Guardian toolkit. However, it's locked behind 3 fairly underwhelming talents. Having access to Innervate could be a nice boon, but having to shift out of bear form to cast it is asinine. There are 2 potentially interesting paths through the Guardian spec tree. The right side of the tree features Galactic Guardian and several other talents to buff your Moonfire. This has the potential, based on tuning of course, to be incredibly strong, with the ability to spread Moonfire to 2 targets being a large quality of life improvement. The left side of the tree contains Earth Warden, an almost mandatory talent, as well as several abilities that can significantly buff your Maul. While this is an interesting option, it remains to be seen whether a route that requires you to dump significant amounts of Rage into Maul will be viable early in the expansion. Ultimately, the flexibility of the tree is just hamstrung by Berserk. Berserk without Incarn is by far the worst 3-minute tank cooldown in the game, and if you invest enough points to get all 4 Berserk and Incarn nodes, you won't have enough left over to flesh out the other portions of the tree you would otherwise want to spend points on. Overall, the Guardian tree feels very clunky. Nothing in it makes up for the loss of snap threat that comes from losing free Berserk when you cast Barkskin. Hopefully future iterations of the tree improve the spec before launch, otherwise they'll be very heavily dependent on tuning to see much play at all. Vengeance Demon Hunter has been one of the premier tanks since its inception in Legion. Even when it's not one of the strongest tanks, it still sees play if your raid team doesn't have a Havoc Demon Hunter, just because of the strength of Chaos brand. Vengeance's Shadowlands tier set were fairly weak and added nothing to the rotation. Because of this, you don't feel like you're going to lose anything day 1 of the expansion. In fact, this spec does nothing but gain buttons. In their class tree, Vengeance has access to abilities that have previously only belonged to Havoc Demon Hunters. Chaos Nova gives them an AoE stun now, and Darkness adds one of the most powerful raid cooldowns in the game. On the initial class tree, Vengeance also had access to Blur, but this was unfortunately removed in the most recent beta build. You can pick and choose any of your sigils as well as quicken sigils. If you don't like placing the sigils with your mouse, you can choose to have them dropped automatically at your target's feet or at your feet. Another interesting addition is Charred Warblades, which heals you for a portion of your fire damage dealt, and it synergizes well with your fire damage buffs found in the spec tree. The spec tree provides flexibility depending on the type of content you're playing. Each path down the tree focuses on different aspects of the kit. The left side appears to be intended for Mythic Plus, with Frailty and Spirit Bomb bringing AoE damage and healing, as well as shielding if you spec into Soulmonger. The right side of the tree is focused around Fiery Brand for big single target damage and cleave damage as it spreads to nearby enemies. This is probably intended to be the path for a raid build. The middle of the tree is mostly defensive options, with Last Resort as a capstone. And while this is technically optional, I'd recommend using it for all content. Vengeance Demon Hunter in its current form looks to be a top tier tank in Dragonflight. I'll be frank, when I first went from playing Prot Pali on live to playing it on the beta, it was a pretty rough transition. In Shadowlands Season 4, Palis are swimming in holy power. Shield of the Righteousness uptime is effectively 100%, and you have the freedom to dump excess resources into extra damage or off healing. Holy power generation in Dragonflight is significantly lower for a few reasons. The loss of the current tier set significantly lowered haste percentages, and a big nerf to Avenger's Shield and Divine Toll so they no longer generate holy power, caused what was once a torrent to feel like a trickle. Barring a new tier set that aids in holy power generation, the new iteration of Prot Pali will require some adjustment. But that's not to say that there aren't some things to be excited about with the new talents. For example, there was a significant buff to the armor value of Shield of the Righteous. Blizzard stated as much that they want you to feel tanky when you press this button, and right now on beta you do. One of the more interesting abilities returning from Legion is Eye of Tyr. This is a 1 minute cooldown, gives a 25% damage reduction to all enemies hit for 9 seconds. This is especially strong in Mythic Plus because it should be up for the start of every large pull. Moving on to the Paladin class tree, this is where you'll find most of Paladin's age-old utility. Blessings of Freedom, Protection, and Sacrifice are all there, and Blessing of Spell Warding becomes available to all Paladins instead of just Protection. You can see this as a bit of a nerf because Ret and Holy become more flexible with this option. The biggest issue with this class tree is that you simply don't have enough points to take all of the utility you would like to have, as well as all the damage options later in the tree. In Raid, this will lead to making some interesting choices on different fights, but in Mythic Plus, you'll likely end up just not taking some utility that you want for more damage. Also, the flexibility in the top of the class tree doesn't carry over to the capstones on the bottom section of the tree. Mad Paragon looks like an obvious choice for a capstone, along with Sanctified Wrath. Seraphim is an interesting option, but it costs 3 holy power, which can be hard to budget. Of Dusk and Dawn returns, but this adds an extra mini-game, and reaching 5 holy power can end up being taxing on your other defenses, and you may just not have enough resources. The spec tree requires you to decide how you want to mitigate damage, but tuning will most likely take care of these decisions for you once you have in-game gear. You can provide shielding and spell block with Holy Shield, Bulwark of Order, and Moment of Glory. The idea of using your Avenger's Shield to shield yourself so you can take bigger hits, you have a higher effective health pool, and then you spend that holy power on Word of Glory to heal yourself back up is an interesting playstyle, although it's a bit similar to Blood DK. You would have to choose this, maybe give up some damage or armor to achieve this build. At the same time, if you sell out for increased armor and damage, you may not have the health pool or the holy power generation to recover from large physical hits or sustain magic damage. So maybe there's just some choice there, or maybe it just comes down to tuning. Protection Paladin is likely to be one of the higher damage tanks. Whether they are viable and high in content, however, will likely come down to whether or not they can survive, in particular during windows where they can't keep Shield of the Righteousness up. If they can take the hits, Prot Paladin's damage is what can set it apart from other tanks. Brewmaster Monk is one of the tanks that has at times snuck into a raid spot just to provide a buff for the group. In Dragonflight, Brewmaster is making the case that it can provide value outside of just being a Mythic Touch debuff. This class is getting all the buttons. For the defensive rotation, there is of course Fortifying Brew, Purifying Brew, Celestial Brew for shielding, as well as Expel Harm and Chi Wei for some mild healing. Healing Elixir and Dampen Harm are now available together, and Diffuse Magic has been added. Zen Meditation remains available and will continue to find niche uses. Being able to stack Diffuse Magic, Dampen Harm, and Healing Elixir should move monks from one of the worst tanks against magic damage to one of the best. Button mashers beware though. Purifying Brew and Healing Elixir have 2 charges and currently no GCD or internal CD, so you can accidentally burn through both of them if you aren't careful. The offensive rotation has no shortage of satisfying buttons either. Bone Dust Brew and Exploding Keg can be used together on a 1-minute cooldown for big AoE damage. Combine that with Weapons of Order every 2 minutes, and you can do your best Windwalker cosplay through the whole dungeon just blasting packs every minute. Don't worry, because Nizao is still around every 3 minutes to remind you that you're supposed to be tanking. In addition to the offensive and defensive tools, Monk's utility remains top-notch. Paralysis, Ring of Peace, and Leg Sweep all remain available mob control tools as part of the class tree. Monk Mobility is also still S tier with Transcendence, Cheap Torpedo, Roll, and Tiger's Lust. Adding more buttons to the spec also adds a layer of complexity. With the passive healing from the tier set gone, and relatively smaller health pool and secondary stat pools at the start of an expansion, Brewmaster is going to require much more active attention to your defensive rotation in order to be successful. The spec offers you the tools to be constantly healing or shielding yourself while you manage your stagger. But with early expansion tuning the way it is, you'll likely need to make very efficient use of the entire kit in order to survive. Overall, Brewmaster Monk has an interactive and rewarding playstyle and looks to be a top 3 tank in Dragonflight. I appreciate you sticking with us for the video. This is our first time putting something like this together, and we'll work out all the kinks over time and get a good idea for what we're doing here. Keep an eye over the next couple days and weeks for more content. Raid testing is going to be starting soon. I'm going to plan to stream that as well over on twitch.tv/thejudman. And keep an eye out for that schedule. I'll try and get that posted. If you're willing to help us out by liking the video and subscribing, that would be great. And let us know in the comments below what tanks you want to play in Dragonflight, maybe what you're excited about the most. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next one.